abduction phenomenon start with. I once had a UFO sighting when I was driving down in Iran between Tehran and Isfahan, which is kind of in the middle of Iran. And there, I was we were driving, and I was, oh right here, so we were driving, and I was sitting in the car. There was my dad was driving. My dad was sitting in the back seat, and his wife was driving, and I was sitting in the passenger seat in the front. And I had my back to the seat, and I was talking to both of them. And suddenly his wife pointed out the window and started to, I had my back to the door, and I was looking at them. She pointed out the window behind me, and she started to make all these strange noises like, "Wah, wah, wah." And then I was so caught up in what I was saying, I really didn't pay attention. And then he looked, and he started to make the same noises, and I could see now both of them were pointing out the window behind me and making these strange noises. So I then turned around, sat in my chair properly to look out the window and see what it was. And very close, coming down, about, maybe 300 feet, 400 feet this way, like where I could see it in great detail, there was this object coming down slowly. I could see divisions on it, like it had different floors. I could see clear divisions, and I could see windows, and then I was seeing green lights all around it to the point where it was glowing green. And it had a green glow, and it was slowly coming down, and eventually it was perpendicular to my window, and I looked out, and then I saw from the blackness in the desert, it was just, there was no street lights. This was the small highway in the desert in the middle of Iran. This black thing came out of the ground like a big tube, and it was the same color as the night that was around it. So it was camouflaged, but I could see it because I was so close to it. This thing went on top of it, and it just went right into the ground. So its whole trajectory was, it was just coming, and it went down. And that was, very impressive. For I just sank in my chair, kind of in a state of shock. And then I was talking to my dad and his wife about the Bible, and about the Lord, and about prophecy, and about angels. And then his wife turned around and she said, "This was a sign from God to show us that all that Ali is saying is true." That was kind of what came out of her mind. And then he just kind of sat there quietly, and so did I. And then we drove. Life went by. We didn't talk about it too much. A few years later, I was doing a documentary on UFOs, and I told my dad, and he didn't say anything. I was surprised, and I said to him, "Well, do you remember?" And he suddenly interrupted, and he said, "That green thing on the road to Isfahan." And I said, "Yes." And that's when I realized he too had seen a green thing. And it was glowing green. People often describe different colors because I could see the hundreds of green lights on it and glowing. And it was really interesting. So this was in 1997, and it kind of really propelled me deeper into looking into UFOs. And I've come to gain a lot of information about them and about the whole world of UFOs, and what's even inside of these ships, and what is actually happening inside of these ships, and how does it relate to the Bible and the beings that we see in the Bible. Because the Bible is telling us that it's actually a book that is talking about the world outside of our window, about real cities and real people. So we should be able to follow the breadcrumbs of the Bible, and that's what a lot of archaeologists have done, and see the world and find the world that we're reading about. And of course, in the Bible there are all these beings. They're called the Elohim, the mighty ones. And in English we often use the Greek angels for them. And there are these other whole cast of characters. There is God, there's Adam, but there's these other characters. And some of them are dark, like Satan, I guess, is the most famous one. And then there are other ones that have very noble missions, like there's Gabriel, who's a messianic messenger. Each time Gabriel appears in the Bible and he opens his mouth, he has a message about the Messiah. And he's the one that declares the birth of the Messiah, or that he's going to be conceived to Mary. He also is the one that performs that role. And Michael seems to be more like a general. He's a warrior, he's the head of the armies, he deals with Satan. he's the one that arrests Satan. So there's these characters, and then in the apocryphal tradition, there's even more of these guys. Raphael, and in the Book of Enoch has them as well. So who are these guys? Where do they come from? How do they get to the earth? And where's the evidence of their existence? That becomes a question that someone who's looking into the Bible, asks themselves. So that kind of led me down a journey. I have a computer here, so I was going to show things. That kind of led me down a journey that took me to all kinds of strange places. This, as I was kind of looking into the archives from the past, I found this gentleman here interviewed me in 2008, and then there's a guy down here, and he writes to me, he says, I'm a radio show host in Chicago, and I would like someone to debate John Anderson about the devil. And then he says, well, I recommend that you contact Ali Siadatan or L.A. Marzulli. And this was, there's an interview here with me that you can listen to on this website, and there's also an interview with L.A. Marzulli, who was the guest. And the purpose of tonight's talk was for me to fill in a little bit of the gaps from L.A. Marzulli's great presentation that he did for us at the Days of Noah, and kind of backtrack and kind of fill you in with perhaps information that you're lacking that helps you appreciate better his discoveries in the Americas. So I'd like to start by talking about the alien abduction phenomenon, which is a very, very strange phenomenon. There are all these people, that's a hybrid, that begin to claim that they're seeing essentially alien ships, UFOs, spaceships. And when you kind of take a bird's eye view of the 20th century, starting in the 1940s, you see different parts of the world having these mass UFO sightings. The people who start to look into it, they call it flaps, UFO flaps. That's the term they use. They invent that term, flaps. A very famous UFO flap is the Mexican UFO flap. The Mexican UFO flap began in July of 1991. There was an eclipse of the sun, and everyone was gathered to watch the eclipse of the sun. And so it was large crowds, and it was 1991, so people had camcorders. And next thing you know, there is right underneath the sun this metallic object, standing, and then all of these ships begin to appear. And you can Google and watch camcorder footage, because there's a lot of people there that had it. And suddenly, of course, it's public news. And in Mexico, in the Mayan prophecies, it was said that during the eclipse of the sun in 1991, the gods would make an appearance again. I don't know how many Mexicans, believed in that or even knew about that prophecy. They had just really come out to see the eclipse. So suddenly these ships appear, and from 1991 onwards, people start to see mass arrival of UFOs in Mexico. Different countries have dealt with it differently, and there's a whole history of how this information has been cataloged or spoken of or kept from people. In Mexico, it was decided that they wouldn't keep it from the people. So it was on La Prensa, the main newspaper of Mexico, the next day, and the gentleman who really got involved in talking about it was Jamie Mosen, who was the host of 60 Minutos. He was considered, the most prestigious journalist of Mexico. And so I'm going to show you a bit of footage from Mexico right now. This footage I'm about to show you is very interesting. In 2004, we were involved in making this documentary that presented a biblical perspective on UFOs, and we were looking for UFO footage to put up. Where do you find this UFO footage? Suddenly, it's on the news. The Mexican Air Force is traveling over these fields where there are warehouses, and they are using infrared cameras, which are cameras that detect heat. Infrared is essentially heat, it's the ray of heat that comes out of things, to look inside of these warehouses for drugs. And as they're flying over these warehouses looking for drugs using infrared cameras, so you know about the electromagnetic field, a stream. Why is it that you can see this bookshelf? Well, because our eyes sees light, which, Newton's famous experiment of the prism. There are 7 colors in the light, and we can now see. But there are many, many other fields of energy in the universe that our eye can't see. And that's why we create all of these various telescopes that we put up in space. Each one is designed to detect a different frequency of electromagnetic energy. The Hubble telescope is the one that's designed to capture visible light. And that's why all the pictures we see are from the Hubble telescope, because it matches our own way of looking at things. So suddenly, the naked eye could not see what I'm about to show you, but these infrared cameras could. So they're looking outside the window, and they suddenly catch these things. Like, what do we do with this? And the Air Force in Mexico, the government decides, we're going to release it to the public. And they give it to Jamie Mosen. And he says, whoever wants it, email me and I'll send it to you. And I'm like, great, send me. And he sent it to us. And that's how we got it in the documentary. So it's very, very interesting footage because it comes from such an important source. I might as well show it to you from the beginning of the next seconds because there's so few of us here tonight that we can take some time.
Cosmic awareness and earth changes. On that day, shortly after 1 p.m., a silver disk hung motionless below the total solar eclipse. By appearing during 2012 AD,
here we go.
themselves gods to our ancestors, be reinventing themselves for the modern world as modern-day gods or as aliens who have come to rescue us from ourselves. The Mayan calendar starts at 3114 BC and ends at 2012 AD. In 755 AD, Mayan priests prophesied that the total eclipse of the sun of July 11, 1991 would herald 2 events: cosmic awareness and earth changes. On that day, shortly after 1 p.m., a silver disk hung motionless below the total solar eclipse. By appearing during this eclipse, the UFOs have identified themselves to many as the Mayan gods. The solar eclipse, labeled the sixth sun by the Mayan priests, has been followed by a wave of UFO sightings in Mexico, which continue to this day. In March of 2004, the Mexican Air Force captured this footage on an infrared camera. The footage was released to the public.
Or you can watch this too.
This video, captured by NASA, shows two UFOs. It appears one of the UFOs is fired upon as it zooms away.
So, just want to show you this footage to put some reality. A lot of this is like this. After a while you get to recognize what's a real footage or not. Usually one of the manifestations of these UFOs is these white, bright, shining lights. It's very well documented. So the documenting of all of this. Hello, be careful, there's a wire here. Watch out for the wire. Walk over it. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, have a seat anywhere you like. How about on this blue chair?
It's a little too low for me.
It's too low? Okay,
How about here?
Right there.
Or
Okay.
even this one here,
Perfect.
more support.
How are you? Welcome.
Not too bad. Had a little late business with my lawyer.
Okay. So, these UFOs, they are documented by mainly American professors. The first guy who really began to document these was J. Allen Hynek, and he discovered that they sightings that people were writing about to him fell in very specific categories, 5 in particular, and he was hired by the American Air Force for 20 years, 1940 to 1968, to document UFO sightings. He was then going to present his research to the Air Force, who was supposed to look into it further and present that research to the Congress, and Congress was going to report to the American people, because so many Americans, starting in the late 40s, were coming forward and saying that they see these things. So really, that was the American UFO flap, starting around 1947. And some people later on, as they've kind of looked at this mass arrival of UFOs from the 1940s, have said, you know what, that's really interesting, because that corresponds to the year the State of Israel was formed, which many see as the fulfillment of the most significant, Bible prophecies since the coming of the Holy Spirit in the book of Acts. So it was very important that this phenomenon began to happen. And as the 20th century rolled on, we saw that the Middle East has become more and more a place of quagmire and trouble and battle and war and all that stuff. So one of the professors that started to analyze this information, his name was David Jacobs. And David Jacobs really started to follow the research of another very famous researcher called Bud Hopkins. Bud Hopkins got interested in the accounts that people had about UFOs that talked about them being actually taken away. They were taken away. They weren't just seeing ships flying around. People were saying that they are being abducted. And it wasn't so simple. Like, the people he was talking to were confused about what was happening to them. The reason they were coming to people like Bud Hopkins and later on David Jacobs was actually mainly to understand what is happening to me. Am I crazy? Am I dreaming? Or is there something real happening to me? And they suspected that it was, because abductions begin in childhood and they continue into old age. Less older people than people who are, in the age where they can reproduce. And I'll tell you exactly what happens to abductees from childhood to old age, so you understand the usefulness that they have at different stages of their life to this very interesting phenomenon. So Bud Hopkins was studying abductions, and he wrote a book called Intruders in 1981. In 1982, he coined the term hybrids, he said, well, you know what, my research has shown me that human-alien hybrids are being created. And that term kind of stuck. So David Jacobs met Bud Hopkins, and he got interested in his research, and Bud Hopkins taught him actually how you had to access this information in people, and it involved hypnosis. Because hypnosis puts people in a more relaxed state, and their subconscious mind opens up, and what's deeper below the consciousness comes out. As I tell you this story, you'll see that the mind is very important. The mind is, of course, a very powerful tool, more powerful than the computers and technology we've created. And the mind is very, very important in this whole story, the mind of men and the mind of these beings and what they do to the human mind. And one of the things they do is they bury the information behind what's called screened memories. So when a person begins to actually talk about what they think they saw, they usually will have a story. Oh, I saw wolves, I saw tigers looking at me down in my bed. I was walking inside of the sands of Egypt. I was in the bedroom. I saw this beautiful woman. And as the hypnotist, if they're skilled and they know what they're doing, and this is really what Bud Hopkins taught Jacobs, begins to dig deeper, the screen memory falls apart and the true memory emerges. And what's interesting in the scientific research is that what people say is identical. Everyone tells the same story, and that's what was very fascinating. And I'm going to tell you what that story is. So then you understand, but who was David Jacobs and who is David? He was a professor at Temple University, which is an Ivy League university. He was a professor of 20th century American history. And he got interested in this because this was part of the, he was a professor of the history of 20th century American culture. And this was part of the culture. So he got interested in it, UFOs. Another very important researcher was Johnny Mack. Johnny Mack was the head of psychiatry at Harvard University. He thought, you know what, I'm going to show everyone once and for all that this is just nothing more than a disease, akin to demon possession from the Middle Ages. It's a psychological disorder. But after doing his research, he really shocked the academic world. In 1994, he published a book called Abductions, where he said this was all true. He said that these people were completely sane in every aspect of their life, and there was no need to believe that they were suddenly making up a lie about this one strange phenomenon. So who are these people that are being interviewed? These people are doctors, lawyers, judges, professors, even ministers, housewives, people that we trust with very important tasks.
The abductees?
Yes, the abductees. So they're coming forward, and as the late 20th century unfolds until this day, gradually, with hindsight, Professor David Jacobs does become the world's foremost researcher. He is the one that has spoken to more abductees than any other person in this entire planet. And he has now documented 1,125 accounts. So he's listened to the story of these people. And these are people that he's followed for like 25 years, 30 years, some of them. So he has really seen what happens to them over the course of time. How is it that the role they play as an abductee changes over time? And so I would like to first, before I provide context, provide the raw research so we understand what we're talking about. What do these people tell when they come forward? And before Professor Jacobs began to write his books, and then really the first book they wrote about abductions, that he went into it in great detail, was called The Threat, and it's right next to you right there. Before that, there wasn't really a lot of information. It's not like you could go read this online or watch it in a movie. I mean, there was Intruders, written by Bud Hopkins in the early 80s, but you can even go and watch a really fascinating episode of the Denny Petty show. You remember that woman? She invites these abductees, 3 of them, and a very, very interesting show. You can watch it on YouTube. And she invites Bud Hopkins to that show. So these people are coming, and this is what they say. First of all, they are abducted from childhood into old age. It does follow bloodlines, meaning that if one of your parents is an abductee, then you will be an abductee. And if you're an abductee, then your children will be abductees. Why do they follow bloodlines? My research has led me to a theory that I will tell you later on once we have all the information. But that's one fact. So the person will say, well, you know what, I'm lying. Most abductions happen during the day, contrary to popular belief. You think it all happens at night. Actually, most abductions happen during the day. And that's why there's this phenomenon, it's called missing time, because David Jacobs coined this term, because people start looking for you. I mean, imagine your child disappears. Like, people call 911. People walk around the block. People look for you. They go, what happened to you? You just went to get a pizza down the street. And this is an example. It's a real example. This woman goes and gets a pizza. And instead of being back in 20 minutes, she's back in 2 hours. And they're like, what happened to you? So then she comes to David Jacobs for him to start looking into her mind. And then he discovers what happened to her. And it's a very fascinating story. She gets picked up by 4 hybrids and taken on a mission. And I'll tell you that story later if you want to. So these people come and they say, well, they're essentially paralyzed. And the abduction phenomenon usually has a few of these characters. They're called the Greys. They've become really popular. You see them in a lot of magazines and stuff. I'll show you a picture so that we have some visuals. These every drawing that I have here was drawn by abductees themselves. These are the Greys. You may have seen them. Now they don't, you see how this guy has a mouth underneath his nose? They don't actually have mouths. No one reports them with mouths. This guy, he told Dr. Jacobs that he felt it was really strange, didn't have mouth, was uncomfortable with the idea. He just decided to give them mouths in his own drawing of them. And these guys, they are in the hierarchy from the reports that an overwhelming number of people are telling the same story. They are the lowest group of people. They are like workers. They do very specific tasks. Now, one of the tasks that they do is the abduction itself. It's one of their tasks. So it'll be 2 or 3 of them around you. And then above you, at the top of the bed, where your head is, there will usually be a hybrid. And later on I'll tell you what these hybrids are. And that person makes suggestions to your mind that you can hear. And the suggestions are very comforting suggestions. Things like, it's going to be all right. It's all going to be okay. Just relax. And as I said, the mind is very important in this whole story. And the suggestions of the mind. You should know at this point that what all the abductees report is that all of these beings, and I'm going to tell you who these beings are, I'm going to show you pictures of drawings of all of them, they are all telepathic. It's an entirely telepathic society. The ships, we see barely any writing. We don't see any writing. We just see symbols here and there. On the consoles there are symbols. In front of some doors there are symbols, because they are an entirely telepathic society. So they speak in images and thoughts. And so that's what the guy on the top of the bed does. He tells you everything's going to be okay. And then the person feels that they're lifted up and they're now hovering. They go through the door and the window, through the door or the window, and they are taken into a spaceship. Now this spaceship is usually parked above the house, and as they're taken, they see their neighbors down. They see them walking along. They're walking their dogs, talking to each other. So for the course of the abduction, this ship is rendered invisible. Once in a while, a person will say, I saw a bright light. Like, I was in Muskoka and at a friend's farm, and all these neighbors came over, and they had heard that I was a researcher of this stuff, of UFOs. And so they all had some UFO stories to tell me, because on that farm there had been a very famous sighting. And very close to the farm in Muskoka,